Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. Many of you might recognize the row housing behind me and maybe the sound of the sirens. We're in Baltimore where The Wire was shot, and many of you probably have seen that show. We're here discussing the economy, Wall Street, state financing, and what's happening to people living in houses like this. And joining us to discuss all this is Tom Ferguson.
Hi.
So tell us, what has Wall Street got to do with people living in houses like this?
Well, Wall Street affects people here, in the Wire part of Baltimore the way they affect pretty much the whole rest of the United States. They basically take enormous risks. If those work out for them, they keep the profits. If it doesn't work out for them, we end up having to make up the losses. And since they're banks, they take down the rest of the economy, and they take down not only themselves but the rest of us. And then the place stays down for years. I mean, the problem of a financial crisis is bigger than just an ordinary recession. That's what Wall Street, it's that sort of second order effect. Not just on the fact that we've had to make up their losses themselves, but the way they can do all the collateral damage.
One of the big problems in Baltimore is affordable housing, even though so many houses are actually sitting empty and boarded up. But there's no money for affordable housing. There's a big crime problem in Baltimore. But apparently right now in Baltimore, there's a no overtime policy at the police department, something people would have seen in an episode of The Wire. So how does those two things connect?
Okay, they connect not just in one, but in several ways. First of all, just on mortgage financing, what you get is the system that pushed mortgage loans out on people, in many cases deliberately unaffordable, where you do these adjustable rate mortgages with that jump real fast, that they can't possibly be paid off, and are often sold through mortgage brokers, where the mortgage broker deliberately, because they get paid, deliberately from the company making the loan, which then sells it to Wall Street, which goes into the collateralized debt obligations, which go into the mortgage bonds, et cetera, all that stuff. They saddled this place with an enormous amount of debt that was essentially unpayable, and that they knew was unpayable to begin with. One effect of Wall Street on a place like this is it bankrupts big chunks of it, and that, of course, then as it collapses, well, not just the value of the houses that people couldn't pay the mortgages on, but all the houses around go down. The usual problem in towns like this is there's no tax base. And so it's tough to issue bonds that anybody wants. And nobody is going to make them big loans because they have something. Just yesterday or so, Harrisburg said it was going to miss a bond payment, for example. You'll have to go beyond just sort of fixing on banks on that problem. I mean, somebody's going to have to come in and provide low interest finance to solve that type of a problem. You probably can't get that through a private banking system.
For people that watch the TV show The Wire, they know that the city, Baltimore, was constantly running out of money for its policing. Particularly problem was running out of money for schools and not enough money to pay teachers. You can see behind us boarded up houses. There's not enough money for affordable housing. At municipal and state level, there's this financial crisis that's hit, and likely is going to hit even more seriously as some of the federal stimulus money that was going to states runs out.
If the Wall Street role in this was simply to take the enormous risks that collapsed the economy, and whenever the economy goes down, the tax collections fall way off, and the states and the localities cannot borrow endlessly, so they're sort of stuck. They can't print money, and so the debt limits are really hard and fast. In that situation, you have a problem. In a market-driven society like that, where you've got this huge cyclical downturn, and you won't use federal policy to effectively pump up the economy to get to full employment, cities are, it's really catch-22. It won't work no matter what you do. These people, in effect, can run all they want. Their problem is the national income's way lower than it should be. It's a super cyclical problem. It's not just cyclical. It's a financial crisis gives you worse than a regular business downturn. And if you don't have a national policy either to get back to full employment pretty fast or to bail out towns and cities, then they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and you just get this endless nightmare, which you can see in both cities and states. Baltimore, obviously, state of California, they're cutting back. The income is still either not rising at all or falling. The tax collections fall off. It just gets worse and worse.
So there's elections coming in November. So if you lived in one of these areas, or to people who do, what should they be asking their politicians?
Well, they need to be asking the Democrats, why didn't they act like Democrats? And that answer, and actually do something for ordinary people. Why did you just rescue the banks? That's the question they should be asking the Democrats. And of course, you don't have to ask that question. I think I wouldn't like to get directly into partisan politics, but who would ask a Republican, why they rescued the banks and not the ordinary population? The unemployment is you only have to have one panacea, and full employment is the panacea. If you get people back to work, almost everything else will right itself.
All right, so how does the government get everyone?
Well, I think we all know what they did wrong, which was when they came into office, they offered a stimulus program that was about half the size of the one they should have. And they also didn't do anything on housing. The Obama administration's housing programs have just been, and mortgage relief, they just do nothing. They should have just done what they did in the New Deal. Move vigorously to put people back to work. You should have seen, cranes and construction stuff everywhere. Kids who couldn't find jobs, Civilian Conservation Corps, Federal Emergency Relief, all that stuff. That should have happened.
Still what they should be doing?
Yeah. Their problem is, we all know we're stuck in a kind of underemployment equilibrium, meaning you're stuck with high unemployment for years and years. Yeah, they need to move vigorously against this. It's plain that the invisible hand is just waving goodbye.
So the Republicans say you do that, and you wind up, number one, creating an inflationary cycle, and two, they say these kinds of government-made jobs eventually run out and don't actually build anything.
Republican, first of all, do the government jobs build anything? If we go down the street, you'll run over a whole load of WPA bridges and buildings in this town that were built. Now, tell me they didn't build anything. I'm looking down the street, okay? The question about the deficit is, if you come back to full employment, national income goes back up, the tax base goes back up. The claims about inflation are just nonsense. That's the thing that was so crazy. When Obama came into office, it is true, exactly what you said. Republicans said, if you do this, you'll get a huge inflation deal. Well, they did about a half-size thing, and there's no trace of inflation at all. People now fearing deflation. When was the last time in our lifetimes? I've never seen deflation inspectors before, and yet that is plainly a possibility here. We're not, you show me where inflation is in the United States.
So the counter-argument goes, whether it's inflationary or not, you can create a kind of crisis of credibility about the currency, because where's all the stimulus money coming from?
The whole world's buying dollars. Since this crisis began, stepping back from 2008, the dollar's gone up and up. Indeed, the administration's plans, to some extent, were, I think they were hoping for an export boom. That's never going to happen. When you have a crisis in the euro, nobody wants to sort of lay in 25 years worth of euros much. It's not like there's lots of currencies out there. People are even buying the yen right now. There's a limit to the yen for yen. I think that whole story is, frankly, a fantasy.
But as part of the issue, too, is just the question of taxation, which is there's going to be enormous pressure if you have this kind of government works program to start taxing wealthy people to pay for it.
Well, you got an issue with the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, and the administration basically wants to freeze them in place for middle and lower income folks, and the upper 2% or so. They want to do taxes. It's not much of a tax rise. It just puts it back to where it was in the 1990s, where nobody was particularly claiming they were hugely overtaxed.
If you forget some people like it or don't like it, in terms of its pure economic effect, does taxing the wealthy slow down the economy? Because that's
if you tax anybody in a recession, you will slow buying. In the sense that the aggregate demand will fall, but that's an easy offset. You can just you just do a government program which in general it won't be spent at the same rate it's all saved anyway. I mean, that's the part of the problem. So you're better off with a vigorous government program. And the real issue is the real issue on those tax cuts is what happens 5 or 10 years out. I think there's a case for not I'm not an alarmist about the state of the U.S. deficit. Most of the stuff that's written on this is just nonsense. We're nowhere near going all bankrupt or anything like that. That's why people are buying dollars, and that's all there. And why the yield curves don't look at all like an incipient financial panic in dollars or anything like that. Quite the reverse. So I wouldn't, I don't worry about that stuff very much.
All right. So final word, if you're going to say something to people living around here,
they need full employment more than anything else. That's what you've got to have. You need an economic program to put people back to work fast.
When you walk through the garden, gotta watch your back. Well, I beg your pardon. Walk the straight and